Hi everyone, I'm Marbos here, and I'm here to tell you some of my thoughts about Jagged Alliance 3. I had quite a few people asking me about it, and I already played for about 16-17 hours total in 2 days. So I figured I'll make this video to talk about it a little bit. Now let me start by saying that the game is pretty damn good overall. They definitely nail the humor, the overall spirit of Jagged Alliance. I don't really have a lot of complaints there, mostly like nitpicks perhaps. So for example, your mercs only really have a handful of lines, and some of them can be a little annoying, meaning you might eventually get a little bit annoyed with one of your guys saying the same exact thing over and over and over. But like I said, that's a pretty minor nitpick. Now, before I say anything else, let's just make it clear that a lot of these things are just my opinions. I think that should be obvious, but just in case it's not, here we are. Most of these things are just my personal opinions. So, first, difficulty. That's definitely going to be a big one. The game overall can be pretty hard, especially some aspects of it. But at the same time, it can also be easy. So what does that mean? For one, you will often have very easy fights in the middle of some pretty damn tough fights. The game also doesn't really hold your hand and tell you where exactly you should go and what you should do. It's quite open-ended, very sandboxy. So you might run into some enemies you're not meant to fight yet. And in some very specific cases, I'm not going to spoil anything here, you might run into a situation that you cannot get out of without finishing a certain fight that might be too hard for you. So in that case, you will pretty much have to either keep trying until you succeed, if you can succeed, or reload an earlier save. However, overall, if we ignore situations like this, there are a lot of easy fights, but then you can just randomly run into a fight that's much harder than anything else that's around it. And that happens, I would say, semi-frequently. And furthermore, depending on what tactics you're using, the game can actually be pretty damn hard, or it can be very easy. So let me clarify. There are two strategies right now that involve, I would say, abusing some of the game mechanics, because the balance in this game is definitely off. So let me give you two very specific examples. There's a stat in the game called Grit. Grit is like an extra temporary HP that you get on top of your normal HP. Kind of like a shield, basically. And there are quite a few melee-focused abilities that give you Grit. Which means that you can have a melee group which is focused on these specific abilities that give you extra grit, and you can run around and just wreck your enemies while generating extra temporary health. And a lot of the time, you won't even take any damage to your actual health. This is one of the fairly popular builds right now. There are a lot of people out there who are pretty much abusing this mechanic, because it's a really strong mechanic. It's a very, very powerful mechanic. It's even more powerful if you consider opportunity cost in this game, meaning that when you take damage, when you become wounded, you have to wait to heal yourself. You have to use meds. You just have to rest and let time pass a lot of the time. And if you do anything that passes time in the game, that means you will have to pay your mercs, because you have to pay your mercs regularly, and running out of money is a very real risk. You can take over mines that will generate passive income for you, but the mines will eventually also run out of resources and be worth nothing. And this happens faster than you might think. So overall, this means that anything you do that can potentially save you time on healing, time on crafting, time on literally just doing anything, it also saves you money. So that's the opportunity cost that I'm talking about. If you are able to finish fights without taking damage, and Grit is one stat that makes it easier to do so, you ultimately save money, because you can do more things before you have to pay your mercs. Anyway, if melee is not your thing, The second build that you can potentially abuse quite a lot is, let's say, an Overwatch kind of build. Basically using constant Overwatch as your main tactic. Because Overwatch is a very, very powerful mechanic in this game. With Overwatch, you can potentially take more shots than you would be able to take otherwise during your normal turn. So that's what makes Overwatch powerful. So the reason I mention this is because it ties back into difficulty. If you don't use a build or a strategy like this, the game can be pretty damn hard, but if you do, it can be almost laughably easy in some cases. It's pretty much up to you whether you want to abuse some of the imbalances in the game or not. Obviously though, same exact thing goes for many, if not most, strategy games. This isn't like unique to Jagged Alliance or anything. It's just a thing that happens in a lot of strategy games. But I would say that it's a little bit worse here on average. It's definitely not a balanced game by any means. I will say that. There are also some bugs I run into. For example, one of the characters you can hire has a special perk which makes him use strength instead of dexterity for accuracy with unarmed attacks. Except if you perform any unarmed attacks with him, he still uses dexterity for accuracy with them, despite the perk. And his dexterity is really low, while his strength is really high. But these are things that can get fixed in patches, obviously. Now, another thing about the difficulty is that the game doesn't really tell you anything about some of the more obscure mechanics and interactions, and you have to learn them over time. Some of them will take you a while to learn or notice, unless you maybe read about them somewhere. So this can definitely tie into difficulty. You will almost certainly screw up your first playthrough in some ways, unless you research the game in advance. But if you don't, if you go into it blindly, I think you should be prepared to mess your campaign up in various different ways. And that will increase the overall difficulty, maybe even drastically. So be prepared for that. Now, one more thing about the difficulty is that you have a tactical difficulty and a strategic difficulty. And at least in my opinion, the strategic difficulty in this game, so resource management and things like that, can be hard in an unfun kind of way. Because for me, the game can be hard but fun, or hard but frustrating. And I do think that the strategic difficulty, a lot of the time in Jagged Alliance 3, can be hard in a frustrating kind of way, and definitely in an annoying kind of way, at the very least. And obviously this is just my opinion, like I said at the start, but it's a pretty strong opinion, let's just say, after 16-17 hours of playing so far. You also have to be prepared to shuffle your inventory around a lot. Jagged Alliance is definitely a bit of an inventory simulator. Always has been. So be prepared to spend a fair bit of time managing your inventory. So speaking of things that can be frustrating, let's talk a moment about the tactical part of the game. Now, one thing you will do fairly frequently is move around the local map in real time, trying to set up an ambush. So this is the stealth part of the game, which, in my opinion, is by far one of the weakest parts of this game overall. Because one of the problems is that this is a turn-based game at its core. However, when you're running around setting up an ambush, you are doing it in real time, and you cannot pause. You cannot pause to set up your attack. You just have to time it like in an RTS. I mean, this is a real-time part of the game, and it's not pausable. So you have to time it well, or you will get ambushed yourself, basically. You will miss out on an opportunity for a good opener. Maybe you will fumble your opener and make the situation even worse, and make the fight unnecessarily hard for yourself. So obviously you can just reload in that situation, but if you don't like reloading, and especially reloading fairly frequently, and you're not very good at real-time strategy mechanics, then you'll definitely find this aspect of the game rather frustrating. I know I did. One thing you can also do, however, which ties back into what I said about melee builds earlier, is that you can literally just run up to the enemy, stand right in front of his face, literally, and it will still take him a few seconds to acknowledge you and go into combat. So that is a little bit weird. And just to make it clear, you also cannot switch between real-time and turn-based at will when you're in ambush mode. The turn-based part of the game only starts after you ambush the enemy, or after they detect you. You cannot switch at any moment you want at will, and then take a shot or two. You cannot do that. So, let's move on to other things, and actually something I probably should have started with, before anything else, is the early part of the game. When you start the game, you have to clear an island. I don't want to spoil the story or anything, so I won't go into the specifics, but this starting island that you have to go through is sort of like an extended tutorial almost, and the game only really opens up after you finish it, but it can take you a while to actually finish it. I feel like the pacing in the first few hours of the game is definitely a little bit off. But again, that's just my opinion. Still, it's a pretty strong opinion. The game gets much more interesting once you get past that initial island. Next up, performance. Now, performance is not bad. However, it feels sluggish at times. I did have quite a few random frame rate drops, seemingly for no reason. But fortunately, I did not have any crashes, memory leaks, or things like that. So, performance is not bad, but it definitely feels like it could have been a lot better. And this is with RTX 2080 Ti and Ryzen 3900X, just in case you're wondering, and 64GB RAM. So other than all this, I do have some minor nitpicks. For example, the control scheme can be a little bit frustrating at times, especially if you are a long-time XCOM player, and especially around buildings with more than one story. It can get pretty frustrating sometimes. And it's also very easy to misclick things and take an action you didn't intend to take, and there's no way to rewind that. The only thing you can do is just reload an autosave or a quick save. But now, let's talk about the big elephant in the room. I left the juiciest part for the last. And this is definitely going to be the most controversial and talked about aspect of this entire game. So if you still don't know what I'm referring to chances to hit. So before I say anything else, let me just tell you how it actually works in the game if you don't know. You do not get told what your chance to hit the target is. You do not even get an estimation of what your chance might be. You do not get a descriptive indication, for example. You do not get told whether your chance is high, low, average, or anything in between. You don't get told anything. The one thing that you do get told is a list of positive and negative modifiers, and that's it. There's no indication of whether these modifiers are significant or not. Sometimes a perk that affects your chances does have a description that might mention it's a significant bonus, for example. But other than that, on the actual combat preview, you do not get told whether these bonuses or penalties are significant or not. You just get a plus or a minus. So the plus might be plus 5%, or it might be plus 30%, and it's still going to be just a plus. A minus might be minus 5%, or in some cases it might be minus 50%, and it's still just going to be a minus. So that's basically how it works in the game. There is, however, a mod that has been released by developers themselves, which you can get off the Steam Workshop, which shows you full percentages for everything. It shows you the exact chance to hit, it shows you exactly how much every combat modifier is worth in terms of percentage, but it also basically shows you how much health the enemy has. you don't get the full value, but you can see your damage preview. So if you know your shot can do 32 damage, for example, you will see in the preview window how much of the enemy's health that is. So it basically tells you how much health the enemy has as well. So in a sense, this is kind of a non-issue, because if you like not knowing anything, you can just use the base system. You can just use how the game is by default. If you like knowing the numbers, you can use the mod. But now that I described how it actually works, let's get to my opinion. So personally, I'm not fundamentally opposed to not showing the player the exact numbers behind everything, and I do understand the argument behind not doing so. But I do think the system the game uses could have been much better, because in my opinion, if you are a trained soldier or a trained mercenary, even if you're not, you can realistically, roughly evaluate whether any given shot you want to take or you're about to take is likely to hit, is unlikely to hit, maybe it's almost impossible, maybe it's cannot miss unless you're drunk or high. And this is actually what I originally thought will happen when I read the first previews, like months ago. I thought that the game will tell you that your overall chance to hit something is, let's say, high, or low, or average, but that doesn't actually happen. It does not tell you anything about that. Furthermore, what I think is that the game could have been even more interesting if the ability of any given merc to evaluate their own chance to hit, again, in terms of high, low, average, etc., was actually tied to one of his attributes. Because every merc in the game has 10 different attributes, so the attributes are already there. I think the game would have been much more interesting if your own ability to evaluate your chance accurately would be tied to one of those attributes. And this would be a very unique mechanic that I don't think any other game ever had. So personally, I feel like this is a bit of a missed opportunity, because I fully understand the reasoning behind not giving the player exact numbers. I even agree with some of it. I just think the existing system could have been much deeper and much more interesting. That's what I think. With that said, there's one more thing you have to consider, because the game doesn't tell you whether any given modifier is significant or not. You will eventually figure this out yourself through gameplay. Once you have 20, 30, 50 hours, 100 hours in the game, you will know from experience whether some modifier is significant or not. You are just going to need time to figure that out. So ask yourself the question, whether that's something you would like or not. Because the way you can look at it is that this is just an extra time sink. This is an extra learning curve that you must get past. Because in order to play the game well, you really need to know whether various penalties that you can get to your shots are significant or not. If it's just a small 5% penalty, then you don't really have to worry about it too much. If you can be in a tactically superior position, but you have to take that penalty, then you're better off taking that penalty. But if it was minus 30%, for example, or anything actually significant, then your decision would be different. So eventually you will figure out which modifiers are significant and which aren't. You just need to play the game for a fair bit before you will know that intuitively. So again, ask yourself the question of whether you want this to be part of the game's learning curve or not. And then you will get the answer of whether you will enjoy this system or not. Obviously, again, like I said earlier, the mod that shows you all of the numbers exists, but this just means you have to pick between one of the two extremes. There's no middle ground. So what I'm saying in the past few minutes is that I would have liked some kind of middle ground to exist, between telling you everything and telling you almost nothing. Again, that's just me. I would have liked that middle ground to exist. And maybe it will in the future, because the game is moddable. It has Steam Workshop support, so hey, who knows? maybe in the future some of the stuff I mentioned will exist in a mod form. Until then, you have to ask yourself what you prefer, and then choose between using the mod or not using the mod. I do appreciate the fact that this mod actually exists and was released alongside with the game, because it gives the player a choice. Again, it's a choice between two extremes in my opinion, but it's a choice you can make yourself. Personally, I prefer to play with the numbers, but I would have liked some kind of middle ground. Interestingly, there's one system in the game which is tied to throwing grenades and things like that, which tells you a chance of a mishap happening. As in, it will tell you whether your mishap chance is low, high, etc. So this system already exists for grenades. I thought it will be the same with regular shots. And this is without the mod, this is just how the game works by default. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all I had to say about the Jagged Alliance 3 so far. Now let me add one more thing. A lot of the things I talked about in the last 20 minutes are true in the old Jagged Alliance. So in a sense, the game is keeping the spirit of the original games. However, at the same time, I personally feel like the game design progressed a little bit in the last 25 years. So just because a game did something 25 years ago does not necessarily have to mean that a game today has to do the same exact thing. Again, that's obviously just my opinion. And I played all of these games back in the 90s. I mean, I have had a PC since 1992. So I played the vast majority of the 90s classics, especially within the strategy genre. And I still do think that game design progressed in the past 25 years, a lot of the time in good ways. Sometimes in bad ways, but a lot of the time in actual good ways. And the reason I mention this is because I've seen quite a few arguments out there that, oh, this is how it worked 25 years ago, right? And don't get me wrong, this can be a good argument, because if you are making a sequel to something, you obviously want to keep the spirit of that game. But for me, it can't be the sole argument, that's what I'm saying. There has to be other argument behind it, not just that, oh, that's how the old game did it. And sometimes that extra argument can be good or bad, but it has to exist, at least, again, that's my opinion, obviously. And I don't want to repeat myself, but like I already said, I would have liked to see some kind of middle ground between giving you almost no information and giving you all information. I do feel like this is a big lost opportunity. Just imagine, again, like I said, if your ability to accurately evaluate your own shot's chances to hit were tied to one of your attributes, and it gave you an estimation. And maybe that estimation would be more or less accurate based on one of your attributes. I seriously think that would have been an amazing system. But even if we don't go that deep, I do think the game should at the very least tell you whether something is high, low, significant, not significant, etc. That's what I thought will happen originally when reading the previous months ago. And I'm sure there will be a lot of different opinions about this. There will be many debates for months to come, or maybe years to come, whether this system was good or bad, or how it could have been improved. Personally, I don't think it's bad strictly speaking, but it could have been improved. And using a mod that tells you everything is not necessarily the solution everyone is looking for. So that's going to be it for this video. Now, this is not meant as a review or anything like that, so I'm not giving the game a score. But like I said at the start, overall the game is good. It has some weird quirks here and there, so whether you'll enjoy it or not depends on your ability to tolerate some of these quirks. Or maybe you even enjoy them. You just have to ask yourself what you enjoy or don't enjoy. And I hope my video here will help you with that in some way. That is, if you thought about picking up the game but you haven't done so yet. So yeah, thanks for listening to all this, I appreciate it, leave a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.